Sunseed the Journey and today's host, Inayat Gayan.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Wisdom Talk. This is number 9 in our series of enlightening discussions with great thought leaders of our time, exploring the world's great religious traditions and how to live a spiritual and meaningful life in our time. Today, we have an exciting team of guests who are taking the ancient traditions and showing how they apply into today's world. But before we get started, I just want to remind you that you can listen to all of our previous Wisdom Talk guests by going to our website at sunseed.org/Wisdom Talk. And while you're there, we want to encourage you all to help us, because in order to produce these free Sunseed Wisdom Talks, we ask for your support. And the best way to do that is to go to our Guru shop and participate in the purchase of some of our incredible merchandise, eco and lifestyle clothing by going to sunseed.org/Guru shop. And now I have the great pleasure and the great honor to introduce you to Taj Inayat and Gayan Macher. They are Sufi teachers, longtime friends. Taj, you and I go way back. I met you when we were first filming with Murshid Sam for the Sunseed the Journey movie. And then later, we found ourselves both at the Abode of the Message, which was started by Pier Velayat Khan, and Gayan was there. So these are two Sufi teachers. They're going to share with us the life stories and the wisdom that they have. Taj and Gayan, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you, Inayat.
So Taj, could you begin by leading us in the Sufi invocation that was brought to us by Hazrat Inayat Khan? That would be a great way to settle us in.
Thank you. I'd be happy to. And before we do that, I'll just say a few words about the invocation, and then we'll say it together. So basically, an invocation is aligning our body, heart, and mind with the task at hand, which in this case is attuning, awakening, and sharing our humanity together. So it's a way of gathering our intention, our mind. After we say the invocation, I'll say a little bit more about the power of intention. So this is the words, these are the words that were given by the Sufi master, Hazrat Inayat Khan. And he started all his meetings and classes and teachings with this. And it's evoking the journey of awakening from separation toward the one. So in a sense, it's a journey. Of course, we realize later it's a journey to ourself, our deep self. So it's toward the one, and then it's invoking all of the aspiration and blessing and inspiration from all those, from every tradition, all the masters, saints, and prophets who have walked this earth, lived this human life, suffered here, and given off light. And so this light becomes the spirit of guidance for all of us. So that's in essence the backstory of this invocation. So all of us listening today, let's join our hearts in this invocation. Toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the spirit of guidance. So in one sense, we could say this invocation is the opening of the portal of our mind and heart between the form and formless, the here and the hereafter.
Thank you, Taj. Really, really lovely. And, you know, I think I first learned this invocation from Pier Velayat myself, and it's become really the way I start almost any major venture in my life, including this talk today before you did it. So thank you for the explanation. You know, you've had such an amazing life, Taj. And
so I hear.
It would be like make 10 movies just you know, out of your life. But maybe you can share with us a little bit about, you know, what turning points first led you to Murshid Sam, and then to Pier Velayat, becoming bonding with him, becoming his spiritual partner, bearing 2 children, one of whom is now the head of the order. I mean, and it goes on and on. Here you are today in another type of incarnation. Perhaps you, I mean, that would probably take a whole hour, but maybe you can pick a few key points, please.
I figured you were going to ask me this question, Amartat, so I did try and give it a little bit of thought. I do get that feedback about my amazing life. And of course, it's just been my life. And so it seems completely normal. But when I do think about it, there are some very significant, I would say, lines of fate. There's a kind of the core of a Sufi teaching is condensed in a phrase from the Hadith. This is the divine revelation for the Prophet Muhammad, and it says, God speaking, I was a hidden treasure desiring to be known. And so I asked myself, what if we were that God that wanted to be known? What would be a good quality that we would instill in the seekers? What do you think? Curiosity, right? I was a hidden treasure desiring to be known. So I indeed was a curious child. It seemed totally normal, as most children feel it's normal to be yourself. But it didn't seem strange, but I was always interested in what's going on, what's inside. We know, for those of us who have children and grandchildren, what's this? Why is this? What's this? It's why and what. And that's the seekers, that's the natural seeking soul. That's how a soul comes to know the truth through the little unraveling of what is presented. So I was always opened up golf balls. I don't know if they make golf balls the way they did before, but it was quite a magical matrix of rubber and string inside there, and taking apart radios and telephones and getting in trouble with the neighbors while I was babysitting because I would take their telephone apart and I couldn't get back together. And so I would say I wanted to know. And even though I didn't have a witnessing self, I didn't know that I wanted to know. That was a force. And I do believe that our soul is almost like a question. That's the soul. Our soul wants to know until we find out, until we find what satisfies us, right? St. Augustine says, I couldn't rest until I rested in thee. So there is a place where our whole being can rest, but I wasn't there yet. And so I looked in the church because I saw my friends having little marks on their foreheads for Ash Wednesday. And I grew up in a kind of an agnostic family. And so I went and tried to find out about Jesus. And I was very excited when I came home and I had found out that we will be saved if we believe in Jesus. And I wanted, of course, to keep my parents from that awful fate of hell. And so I was telling him enthusiastically about it. And my father, being a litigator and a lawyer, said, now, Carolyn, do you think that all those people who never had a chance to believe in Jesus are going to go to hell? So, of course, that didn't hold up. And that was the kind of the end of my seeking in religion. But then, so to make a long story shorter, I went to a junior year abroad and ended up hitchhiking around, went to the home of St. Teresa. I had a mystical experience in the Prado Museum, seeing El Greco's Holy Trinity. The walls of the museum became transparent, and I went inside the world of that suffering Christ and the compassionate angels. And I think my heart was touched in a way that was, of course, inexplainable. And then on my way home, I was stopping in Greece, and there were these two guys sitting on a rock, and this is in 1963 or 64, with very, very long hair. And people were kind of pointing to them, and they were saying, hippies. Like, I had never heard the word. That was the first time my brain heard the word hippie. And very shortly after that, when I returned to Iowa City, some good friends of mine came up and said, would you like to take this? And I said, what was it? And they said, this is psilocybin. And I said, what's that? And they said, it opens your mind. And that seemed like the perfect thing to do. So I took it, and my friends and myself, speaking for myself, I knew then, for me, what life is about. This, it's like, I don't know the answer yet, but I know the way now. I know I cracked the code or, broken a shell. And then we knew we had to find a teacher. There were only a few books back there, the autobiography of a yogi and maybe a few others. But we went right soon after that to San Francisco because our friends had found a Sufi teacher, Sam. So we drove our Volkswagen bus out, and the first night we arrived in California, we went and visited him. Ooh. It's a deep thing to remember the moment that you meet your past.
Wow.
I was 24, knew nothing. There was Sam, not yet Marsha, Sam, just in the little funky room with 6 of us. He was reading from the orange volumes of Hazrat Inayat Gayan. Now we know that the words of the enlightened master penetrate through our mind and heart and reach our essence, reach our soul. So the words that were being read just struck something so deep, but I didn't know what it was. So that was how I met my initiator, Murshid Sam. And he was what can I say? He was a pure human being. He taught and he gave for the love of his students. He was a bunch of hippies. He was always thinking of their good. There was nothing in it for him. And then that's how I met Murshid Sam. And then he invited Pier Velayat one evening to to a lecture, and then that began a kind of a very dramatic story. That may be more than you wanted to hear, but you know, Amrita, what I was thinking is, there's no women in your movie. And I thought, well, women have kind of a way of talking about things through stories and personal experience. And, you know, maybe it's okay just to go on a little bit about my journey.
It's definitely okay. And you know, if we're getting ready to make a sequel, and believe me, it's going to be at least half women, because the times have changed also. I mean, I know people say, where are the women? And it wasn't really, and didn't come up in those days, but you were there in the movie. So please go ahead.
Yeah. Well, that's my kind of backstory and how I met Richard Sam and Pier Velayat.
Right. So what was it like, your life, being so close with Pier Velayat, a teacher with thousands of followers, and you were traveling with them? What did you learn from Pier Velayat? I mean, so much, I'm sure. Maybe you can give us a couple of anecdotes, and how has that developed into what you are today?
Well, that's a huge, huge question, and I'll just be able to give you, you know, a little, hopefully, kind of a taste, perhaps. You know, for those today, unlike us old people, there wasn't the internet where we could read every spiritual teaching, we could read about yoga, we could read every secret teaching from Tibet and Egypt. We were fortunate if a master, we encountered a teacher, a spiritual teacher. So there was, it wasn't ho-hum, oh, another spiritual master. It was impactful to meet somebody, for me, I'll speak for me, coming from Iowa, coming from no religious background, and yet, as I said, I had a seeker's heart to encounter Pier Velayat, in this case, who carried a lineage of ancient Sufism, you know, whose father was the great master, a spiritual genius, a prophet even, with a universal message for our time. So the impact was disorienting, but compelling. And I know, you know, there's so many stories about masters and teachers and enlightened beings, but I will just say a few things personally about how Pier Velayat affected me. He was a mixture, Richard, as you know, of a rishi. For those of you who may not know, a rishi is those beings. Oh, in your movie, you had several rishis, but you had Brim Das, remember?
Yeah, with his tongue out.
With his tongue out. That's, you know, living in a cave, uninterested, uninvolved in the world below, or we could say another way, in the world of change. In fact, when Pirzia was just a baby, and I went to India for the first time with Pier Velayat, we hiked up to see Brim Das in that cave. And as we got closer to the cave, and you've been there, the air became empty and the trees were like alive. His presence was permeating the whole atmosphere. He was completely outside this world. I mean, there's no this and that world. There's all worlds in one, but it's how we're attuned. So he was tuned to that dimension of the infinite. So Pier Velayat had a great longing for that. It's almost really his basic being. And yet here he was plunged into the life in the world. He, as you know, he lost his father. His father died when he was 11. Pier Velayat and his sister and mother fled Paris when the Nazis invaded. He joined the Navy and was a Navy officer and a minesweeper in World War II. His ship was blown up. His men died. His sister was captured and tortured. So his fiance died on the back of his motorcycle as they were going to tell her mother of their engagement. Here was a man that knew tragedy, loss, despair. I don't think another heart knew that better than his. And he had this, at the same time, this ability to live and rise and take us all into those higher spheres of consciousness and eternal light. So I see him as I don't think of him as a master, although many people do. I'm not saying he's not that. I see him also as a human being that is an exemplar of reconciling these two aspects of our nature, our timeless dimension and our deeply involved heart in this human life. And he gave everything. He persevered, he traveled, he taught. We were still working on an article to publish a few days before he died. He just kept at it. So that kind of perseverance, I now, as an older person with so many ideas about the path and the glory of it, and I come to value that keeping going at all costs.
Yeah.
So those are a few thoughts about Pier Velayat.
Yeah, I'm sure you could go. We could spend the whole hour and a half, but that was really meaningful, to bring in those two aspects of a great teacher, the uplifting and the daily life in the world, because these are the things we're all trying to balance today. Today, your son, yours and Pier Velayat's son, Pier Zia, is now the successor of the lineage that came from Hazrat Inayat Khan through Pier Velayat. But how do you see it's changed over the three generations, how the message today, it must be presented in a different way?
Yeah, well, something that I've given thought to when we look at the time of Hazrat Inayat Khan, when he first came to the West in 1910 and sitting there in the garden of Fazil with his aristocratic students and traveling by ship and giving these talks on radio and meeting Mr. Ford. And there was a whole kind of feeling of the beginning of a great movement. And there was a sense of sacredness and almost, what do I say? What's the word? Slightly otherworldly, as if the East, we're descending into the West, and that kind of meeting. And then Pier Velayat taking up the challenge of the order and having been educated at Oxford and gone through the war and lived a human life, I think what he brought was the further implanting of the Eastern tradition. And now it's just assumed, like the East has met the West. It's assumed that there is a universality, that it's nothing new that we have different religious leaders sharing in a worship service together. So yes, what does the message look like now? And of course, this is where we have to face issues of global warming, issues of justice throughout the world, coming into a fuller recognition of the human family, and that what we do affects everybody. We are interrelated, not just in the soul and in the spirit, but now completely with each other, that we came to see that during the COVID. We had a very close view of how our male person, how the people that make things, masks, where medicine is made. We've seen the interdependence on the most basic levels of life. So these are issues that have to be addressed. How do we live in tune with the infinite, the eternal, which never changes and is unborn and undying, and face these issues, which for the first time, we have a question of whether we will survive or not. Yeah. So these are some of the things we're facing today. Obviously, everybody knows this.
Wow. Yes. And everybody is searching how to be, as you say, in tune with the infinite while we're on the bus or driving our car, wherever it is. Well, Gayan, you've been, let me jump over to you. But first, let me just remind everyone that there's a lot in the movie Sunseed, the journey with Pier Velayat Khan and with Murshid Samuel Lewis. If you haven't seen it, go to sunseed.org and enjoy. Gayan, we met at the Abode. The Abode of the Message was a commune that was started by Pier Velayat and some of his disciples. Taj was there, and I went there also with my family for a year. But you actually stayed on a long time, Gayan. You actually became the manager of the Abode later on. What got you there and to meet Pier Velayat? And then how did that experience of Pier Velayat's teaching, the Sufi teaching, and then living in a commune itself affect what you've become and what you're doing today?
First of all, I feel like I have to make a transition. I feel like I've been listening to a wise bedtime story, and would be content to just sit and listen. But perhaps there's some value in giving another rendition, and I'll try to be brief. I think I came to be at the Abode and find the Sufis in the way that the vast majority of people do. Amrita, is it possible to take my view off me and please let me talk to you, at least to you and Taj, and then I can imagine others. Thank you. I came because of dissatisfaction. Outwardly, I had a good life. I had earned a master's degree in education and psychology. I had a good job. I was in a good enough relationship. I had my music and sports. I was in my early 20s. But I think, as a lot of people know, if you get quiet enough with yourself and honest enough with yourself, you might discover at certain times in your life there's this fundamental sense that just not being completely satisfied, not being totally comfortable in your own skin, at least speaking for myself. So Taj mentioned curiosity as a kind of driving motive force, and I can certainly relate to that. But the other driving motive force that I was aware of, and I think it's fairly common to people, is just this sense of, you can give it different words, but wanting to settle, wanting to feel at home, wanting to have some kind of satisfaction that I did not find, no matter how successful or how many good things I had in the world. I didn't know at the time that the Sufis have a name for this, that it's sometimes called the divine itch. That if it wasn't for that unsettledness, or let's say because of that unsettledness, we're drawn to the deeper life. So I was seeking for that. And I started reading books and similar things as Taj was saying. I took LSD. I had my first experience of unity consciousness. And I knew from then on there's more to the world than I had been perceiving. And I wanted to find out more. So I basically stumbled across the Abode, this Sufi community that was just beginning. And I won't go into the whole story of how that happened, even though it's interesting to me. I didn't know anything about the Sufis. And I got there and I didn't like it. I was kind of repulsed by it. I thought all these uptight people, and it seemed to me everybody was trying to act so holy, and some of them had these weird names that was off-putting to me. And I stayed for a couple of days and I left, and I drove about 20, 25 miles down the road, and I was on this road in New England heading to New York City, and there was a river running beside the road, and I pulled over and stopped, and I went and sat down beside the river, leaning my back against a tree, and I started to cry. I started to cry because in that moment, I was given the gift of seeing myself and seeing this lonely, impoverished person who was encapsulated in his judgments of people, that everywhere he went, nobody was good enough. It was never the right people or the right thing. And I just sat there and wept. And that was an initiation. That was a passage for me. And I decided to get in my car and go back to that place, which I knew nothing about, but I thought it's as good a place as any to sit down, that everybody there was at least trying to figure it out. And I decided to go there and sit down and start work on myself. And I didn't know the Sufis had a word for that, which is called the turn, which is when you cease to look outside for satisfaction and you recognize that the journey to satisfaction is your own mind and heart. So I arrived at the Abode, and you asked what was my experience and how it shaped me, including meeting Pier Velayat. And I began a process there of spiritual study. I took retreats. I learned the practices. I went to classes and learned the view, the point of view of the teachings, which shapes your mind and shapes your life. Meeting Pier Velayat changed my life because I saw there as a reality and as a projection. But when I say as a projection, I don't mean it in a derogatory way. I mean, I carried in my heart a kind of imprint, an archetype of what a human being could be. And I needed some kind of outer mirror to recognize my ideal in my own self. And even though I just landed at this Sufi community seemingly arbitrarily, it was my path. And what opened up there was a culture of beauty. Pier Velayat said, we're here to build a beautiful world of beautiful people. And when I heard him say that, suddenly life made sense to me. It never made sense to just get a job at General Motors or something. And I thought, okay, I'm in. And I've dedicated my life to that ever since. But I have to say one other thing. At the Abode, I underwent a process of spiritual training, and it has been a foundation for my whole life. But as you mentioned, I also became the manager of the community. I was one of the people running a fairly good size operation. There was 120 people living there. We started schools. We were working out financial systems, like how we would interact. We started businesses, and I became right in the middle of a lot of dysfunction. You could say it was political, but what is political but people trying to work out how to make decisions together, how to handle conflict, how to deal with power and influence, etc. And it showed me something. You know, Taj was talking earlier about the rishis in the Himalayas and the discovery of those centuries through the Eastern traditions of the nature of consciousness, of the nature of the soul, which is eternal, was the main influence that many of us were gifted in those times. The exemplar of the rishi in a cave who could live off pure air and hardly eat. A tremendous awakening to be shown something about the nature of our eternal self. But those rishis tended not to be married and have families and try to earn a living and work for a narcissistic boss and deal with financial difficulties, try to be in organizations that were trying to get things done. And I didn't realize that at first. I didn't realize that in addition to the realization of the eternal, there's a whole other development, which the Sufis call the purification of the personality and becoming a complete human. So when I left the Abode, I was not disillusioned, but I was feeling very thoughtful about that I became, it's been the kind of direction of my whole life about human community, where the true nature of our being is translated and expressed in human life, and the refinement of our egos.
You know, you if I may, you spoke about the tradition as that you and Taj both are part of a tradition, and I think this is one of the things that people are searching and with a question mark, because some of the traditions have been so cut apart and belief lost, and people are looking for a tradition. And I know you and Taj have started something now that you call New Reign. What is that, and how do you see that developing to try to bring together, as you were saying, the consciousness of the world as well as the consciousness of the witness for the higher self?
Well, first of all, I would just say that one of the things that attracts me to this tradition is that's the perspective that is given, which is the integration of those elements. Yeah, I think quite a few people have some kind of longing. How could they not? for the discovery of the inner life, and might be reluctant or suspicious of traditions, dogma. I had that issue myself, and it's kind of a dilemma because you can stay traditionless, and there might be legitimate ways to do that, but it's like if you want to master the violin, you need to focus in on that instrument and find a teacher in that instrument. So there's something to be said for having a certain focus. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but what I have always sought is what I consider to be a genuine teacher and a universal dogmaless orientation. And that's why I find myself here. Taj, maybe.
How did you and Taj get together to do this partnership with New Rain?
What's actually, just to give a little backstory, it's very touching because when I got to the Abode and I was 25 years old, Taj was my teacher. And over time in the Sufi tradition, an evolution, a maturation takes place. And at a certain point, the pupil and the teacher walk together as friends. So that's the long backstory. Taj and I have been teaching together. We each do our own thing also, but we've been teaching together, Taj, 30 years or I don't know. We started, what I recall is we started what we called New Rain. And New Rain is a phrase and something Hazrat Inayat Khan wrote, where he said, there comes the living waters of spiritual light, and it takes the shape of religions and traditions and philosophies, but over time those become like a corpse. They become dead forms unless there's new rain, unless there's the living spiritual energy that infuses them. So we decided to label this initiative New Rain, and it began quite simply that we wanted to provide ongoing support for people on this path who had a committed spiritual practice. And to have a committed spiritual practice is not just going to a retreat every once in a while or listening to a seminar and getting high. It's actually some kind of ongoing awareness of your practice of life and, quote, on the pillow. So we wanted, for those people who wanted to make that commitment, like really learn the violin, we wanted to do our best to provide some ongoing support.
I know you have seminars and you have weekly attunements, which we're going to talk about in a little moment, because Taj and some others you do every Thursday, and an attunement practice, and you see on the screen everyone can join it. It's free. I really encourage people to listen to them. I find them very inspiring. But what is, Taj, what is an attunement? And what is the difference between attunement and meditation and prayer and spiritual practice?
Well, let's see. I think all of what's behind these words, the states and the orientation and the kind of the sense of beingness is similar in these terms, but to make it gross distinctions, but those distinctions lose their separateness as we attune, as we meditate, as we pray, they're all like on-ramps that lead us to the big major highway. So they all lead us to the spirit, to our inner being, our innermost being. And that's the keynote of the mystical path. Mysticism is the direct taste. The Sufis use the word taste, tasting the real. Call it God, call it the infinite, call it eternal love. So prayer, we could say, is the communion with that great other that is always beyond our knowing, and yet something in our heart wishes for communion, for intimacy. Somehow prayer bridges the gap between the awesome, vast, unfathomable universe. We have the word in Sufism is Allahu Akbar. That means God is greater, God is greater, God is greater, God is greater than anything imaginable. And so the mind conceives, makes, reifies, and gives concepts. In prayer, we have to let that mind evaporate, disappear. Murshid has the phrase, unlearn what we've learned and come as an empty cup to receive. And it's I would say prayer, we could start with words, we could start with phrases, but they will take us out beyond any place, into the placeless. Attunement is a word we use because Hazrat Inayat Khan was a great musician. And so as a musician, tune. If you have a piano, you have to have your piano tuned. If you're a guitar player, you have to tune. And Murshid came to the West with his brothers. They were the Hindustani trip, and they would come on stage and they would spend an hour, half an hour tuning. And then the audience clapped and they thought it was over. That was okay. Now that was it. That was lovely. Attuning is, we could say, is first of all, listening. What do we do when we listen, right? Let's do this for a minute. Let's just take a moment and see, what is it actually? How do I become open so that something can enter, touch me, that I can be changed or influenced? And in attunement, you listen for the note. It could be even an unstruck note, but you listen for that invisible presence that can open you. Meditation for me is very specific. For me, meditation is first a practice of concentration, which is really learning how to develop steady attention and awareness so that we are not at the mercy of the movements of our mind. It's not, for me, it's not stopping the mind. It's learning how to focus on the object so that we build that muscle of steady attention. And then when we have steady attention, then we can start to open up the more subtle kind of dimensions of awareness and consciousness. So off the top of my head, those are a few.
Well, for our audience, you're going to have a treat here in a few minutes, because at the end of our discussion, Taj is actually going to lead us in an attunement. And so be sure you stay for this, and it'll be around 12:45 Pacific time or 3:45 Eastern time. And we all, in today's world, getting some peace and some and being in touch with our source is so important. As you said, Taj, we're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with the environment, we're dealing with economic, racial struggles and the nuclear threat and huge differences which seem to divide people more and more today. And some of us feel we're called to some sort of action to become a warrior for these causes, and especially those of us, hopefully, in this consciousness community. Gayan, I know you feel strongly about these issues also, and I'd like to play some music that you actually wrote. He's also a great musician. Music of a song called "Earth on Fire, Hearts of Ice." I hope my team is ready to cue it up. We'll listen to some of this beautiful music, meaningful music.
The wind is stirring, the clock is ticking down the time. The wind is stirring, the clock is ticking down the time. The warning bells are sounding, sending us the warning sign. Well, I wonder how you feel. Yes, I wonder, well, I wonder how you feel. When you see the water rising, while we pretend that it's not real. Earth on fire, hearts on ice. Time to be quiet, hear the cry in this night. See if we're willing to sacrifice, to change our ways. Can you tell me what to do? Can you tell me what to do? Seems the man has got the power, but the man don't have a clue. He pushed for profit, he pushed his kids to get ahead. He pushed for profit, he pushed his kids to get ahead. Gone so crazy pushing, he pushed us all right off the ledge. Earth on fire, hearts on ice. Time to be quiet, hear the cry in this night. See if we're willing to sacrifice, to change our ways.
Gayan, what inspired you to write this music?
I wrote that music for my own process of grieving. going through various stages in my own heart of anger, feeling of helplessness, and then just pure grieving. That's pretty simple. I don't want to sugarcoat things, but my experience is that when there's pure grieving, the heart is cleansed, and something can come out the other side that's unpredictable, where with our cognitive minds, we can't find an answer, a solution, or even a way to, in some ultimate sense, to be with the reality of a situation. But when the heart is purified, we can be in touch with resources, inner resources that couldn't have been predicted. But I didn't have all that strategy in mind. I just needed to go through something.
You know, I think with what we're facing in the world today, as I said, people are called to become maybe a warrior for the power of good, and we hope that that all of our study and our search for consciousness and becoming more attuned to the forces will give us some power to make a difference in this world. So how do you see that we can, in a consciousness community, we can play a bigger part in dealing with these problems? You know, first guy on, then Taj, perhaps you could both reflect on this, because it's, as you say, the Sufi path is in the world, not of the world. And so, but this is the world we've been given. Yes.
Well, one thing, Todd, is we get a glimpse that the current state of the world is a reflection, is an expression of the current state of human consciousness. And that human consciousness, to some degree, is embedded in an ego consciousness and everything that means. So if you have people walking around with the view that they're separate, isolated individuals, and everything that comes from that, all the fear and greed, this is the kind of world you get. So the spiritual path works at the deepest level with the operating system that gives rise to the world we live in today, which is the state of consciousness, and recognizes that ego consciousness is a necessary, inevitable stage for the individual, for each of us, but also for the humanity as a whole. It's a necessary stage, but it's a transitional stage. It's like going through puberty or something. And so those who take up a spiritual practice are participating in the emergence of a new consciousness out of the ego shell. Just to be more pragmatic and speak more pragmatically for a moment, I remember reading a letter that Gandhi wrote, and he was preparing for the famous Salt March, where hundreds of thousands of people protested the British rule by marching to the sea. And it was considered, I think, the largest activism that had ever occurred, certainly in India. And Gandhi in this letter said he had absolutely no confidence that this would make a difference, except for the fact that there was a core group of people living at the ashram who were practicing the transformation of their hearts and minds. That was the soul power that invigorated all social action. And I believe that.
Yes. Taj, want to add something?
Yeah, in the same kind of vein, and again, the emphasis on the, I would say, critical need of personal individual work, which leads to relational intelligence and ethics, which leads further. And so the key component, the cell, you could say, is for each of us to come to terms with, as Gayan said earlier. Oh, Marcus, can I also see the Amrita? Yeah, it's hard to. When I say, and when we say spiritual work, spiritual practice, to me, that's something very definite. It means taking responsibility, learning to take responsibility for our thoughts and actions. And this is no small matter. We're conditioned. I mean, we're very recent on the evolutionary timeline, the human mind, the human self-reflecting mind. So to become aware is a monumental kind of achievement. So how do things change until we become aware of how things are and what we're contributing to them? Only then is there a gap, that tiny gap that awareness brings and says, oh, I have a choice. I can do this or I can do that. Would this be a better thing to do right now? Is this going to, what I'm about to say, is that about to help matters, make a harmony? Or usually we are in some state of reactivity where we're just processing our old patterns and our old stories. So again, it's a big job to become awake and aware to our own mind activity and to the patterns that we have experienced that were laid down very early in life. More and more, as a therapist and working with individuals and guiding people's retreats, and in a retreat, basically you're sitting there in your room, in your hut, all day, 24/7, day after day, and what's happening? You're coming in contact with your own interiority, your own history, your own mind, your longings, your fears, and as awareness grows and the heart opens, this light, let's say, of awareness is shown right down to the basement of our ego structure, the kind of the blueprint. And one thing that is actually coming to light now in psychology is the critical importance of good attachment of an infant with parents, and speak about building a new humanity, a better world, something viable for the human race. We're churning out these little beings that have huge attachment deficits. What a well attached, bonded child through the parenting figure takes in a sense of safety, trust, being seen, being appreciated, being loved, being delighted in. Can you imagine that little positive self then becoming a citizen of the world? And we have in prison and in all our institutions this like gaping hole of self-hatred and no positive self inside. So therapy, healing, trauma healing, to say the least, as in the journey of awakening, so that there is actually a self, a positive self, a good self, a valuable self that I offer to the beloved, that I give to God. But the kind of world that we see probably in our grandchildren and our friends' children, their parents have given them these necessary ingredients. So that's an important function in the new world, is that we're growing souls, we're growing humans that have this positive sense of self. And then as you look around and you see these children, you see they don't want to hurt other children. They share, they have consideration. So part of the spiritual work is to become a real person, an authentic person, somebody that is, and we all have not had that opportunity to have that good kind of attachment when we were younger. So we need to heal. We need to go into trauma therapy. We need to learn how to know that we are loved by God, that we are worthy. So that's like part of the spiritual journey, is to become an authentic person. And then from that, then we start relating to other people instead of this deficit of emptiness and lack of value and needing food and entertainment and glamour and praise and glitz to have some kind of sense that we exist and that we're valuable. And then, so that follows naturally. And there's a natural development of the self, the good self, the authentic self. More and more than that self, that very seed of the self, becomes the I, the identity, the I am of the cosmos. God's I, our I, awakens to the only I. This little I that I thought I was going at 3 and 6 and 9 and through life, lo and behold, my true I is the cosmic I. But there's a necessary kind of healing of our human self.
It's a lot of great work to do.
Amritat, may I say another word?
Yeah, please. And before, Gayan, I just want to remind our audience that we would love to have you ask some questions of these great people, maybe something you've been holding on to and you haven't dared to speak, but it'll be all, it can be anonymous, and please, if you have questions, put them in the chat. You go ahead, Gayan.
I work with numbers of people who are dedicated to doing what they can to better the world. And these are people who are completely idealistic and intelligent, have energy. But one other response to your question is, to the degree that I'm operating from a sense of separation from, let's call it, the ground, there's just a limit to how much I can go on in terms of endurance and in terms of the radiance of my own light. But part of what you could call the spiritual work is not in an intellectual sense, but in a felt sense, to feel oneself connected to the greater life and discover that greater life is the source of qualities, of resources, clarity, power, endurance, faith that isn't naive. And as Taj said, the sense of love that is holding all of it. And once that is perceived, everything changes. It's not that we feel so alone in our struggle.
I know that you do some work with children or young youth. Let's say you do some retreats with youth, and we've already alluded to the fact how that the new generations have much more accessibility to all the teachings. They where we had to get by luck or chance find someone who was a teacher, could bring the traditions to us and was an example that we could hopefully emulate or at least get inspired by. But today, where's my phone? Everything is well, not everything, but a great deal of information is passed, and personalities and some great teachings are available for free online. Gayan, how do you see? But there still seems to be some sort of a distance for the younger people, especially between all of that, which may be too much, and actually incorporating it into their heart so that it's going to move forward for them. What have you found is a key to perhaps answering what did you call the itch to the younger generations?
Well, I don't know if I can speak for the younger generation.
Yeah, we're all a little older than that.
Yeah, I'm very interested in listening to the younger generation speak for themselves. I do feel that what we're talking about here in terms of the soul being hardwired to find out the nature of the self and of life is never ending. So cultures change, people's interests change, the times change, but that impulse will show up and find its way always. So when the younger generation, some of them are interested in gaining some tips from those of us who have, been at this for a while, and just try to be of service to them.
Taj, and I know that you are deeply in the spirit of Sufism, and especially of Hazrat Inayat Khan. So perhaps you can explain a little bit what is the Sufism of Hazrat Inayat Khan, or how's it adapting to modern times to answer some of the needs of the new generations? Because people are looking for some support, and this could be something that people could find very valuable.
Well, Amritat, I've spent nearly 50 years delving into the teaching of Hazrat Inayat Gayan because it was my deep interest. As I said, ever since I heard that first passage read by Murshid Sam in 1967. And I would say that I'm starting to get a sense of the vision.
After 50 years, right? Yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm serious.
True.
But then things are happening at a faster rate now. People understand things more quickly, and there's something in the group consciousness that is available then for other. It's just a given. Like our kids, if I have some computer issue, I just, or my phone, I just ask my grandkids. So they're like 7 years old. How do you do this? It's just part of the brain. But the point is that Hazrat Inayat Gayan's teaching, I'm kind of going around your question, and then I'll kind of land in the middle of it, hopefully, is that it's vast. It's a vast teaching. He taught about education, philosophy, metaphysics. He was a musician, and he gave this deep esoteric training. He offered at that time, this was in 1910, what was pretty radical at that time, and now it's like meh. It's like we're used to that stuff. So he brought something called a universal worship service, where a candle for the world's religions were lighted and a scripture from the world's traditions. Does that seem unusual today? Not at all, right? So, and he put women in positions of leadership. They were the first murshidas. He said, I see as clear as daylight the time women will lead us to a higher evolution. So his spiritual genius, his vision is embedded in this vast array of teaching. And as I said, I feel I'm just starting to crack the code of what is different about it. What is the additive of Hazrat Inayat Gayan's message? And it's not something I could easily say, but I'll just say a few kind of comments about what I think that is. So we could say he had a prophetic voice. And what is a prophetic voice? Someone who has a genius to perceive and sense what is emerging, you could say, and then give it a name or give voice to it so that it's known. And some of the components, I think, of his vision were that there is a new consciousness emerging. He called it spiritual liberty, the message of spiritual liberty. It's the, let's say, the result of all the gifts that religion has given us, has given humankind throughout the ages, the different times in history in different ways, but for that time, this has all culminated now in a time where we could say, what is the new message? What is the evolutionary edge that's coming? And I think his words speak beautifully. It is the time for the awakening of humanity to the divinity of the human being. That the human being is, and of course, all of creation, but the human being in terms of the active agent and the self-aware being, can know. The universe is awakening through our consciousness to know itself. So you can say God is awakening to know God's self. So this is the essence of this path. And why is it different now? Why is it different than others? Well, of course it's not different. It's not different in that it's the realization of our unity. I just wanted to share here this passage that I have, again, lived with through my journey, and it's by Teilhard de Chardin, who lived at the same time as Murshid and Sri Aurobindo. And I believe that those three particular had this prophetic knowing of this evolving, emerging new consciousness that was, you could say, it's the emergence of spirit through matter. Or you could say the East and the West, transcendence and immanence, creating a container for the birth of the new human. And of course, some think today that the birth of this new consciousness is critical in us going through this evolutionary dire crisis at this point. This is the wellspring from which we can pass through this. And so it's as I said, critical. And this is what Teilhard de Chardin said. It's from a longer passage, and he's talking about going into the very depth of his being. So descending into his core, the core of his I amness, the core of his existence. And this is a very similar passage that we have in Sufism when we do the zikr. The zikr is that same practice of plunging into the depth of ourself. And here is what he says. He says, with terror and intoxicating emotion, I realized that my poor, trifling existence was one with the immensity of all that is, and all is still in the process of becoming. So I feel this is really the depth of, says Mershid's kind of view, is that we are at a time when the eternal that is never becomes, it always is, it's unborn, is marrying, is kind of knowing itself through this becoming, that the universe is becoming new consciousness. New consciousness is becoming, and we're all can be participants of it. So that is not to exactly say how new young people can make use of this. So, but if any of these words stir you, then follow the breadcrumbs.
We just put on the screen a couple of websites that people can go to get more information and follow along with the Sufi path and with the teaching of Taj Inayat Gayan. But I have one last question before we take the questions from our guests and our listeners. And I think one of the key difficulties that not just the new generation had, you expressed it too, Taj, and Gayan in a way also, that many of us were brought up within a religion where we were told about God, and God was sort of our constant companion, not understanding what it meant or who we were. And over time, religions have proven to be very disappointing to many of us, and not answering the sort of question like what you asked, Taj. I asked the same sort of question in my Jewish background, never got an answer. And so this is why many of us were drawn in the 60s to these new religions, to these new types of thought. But in today's world, I think that people are even more and more disconnected from the concept of believing in some power that is invoked a lot by Hazrat Inayat Gayan. So how do you address people's desire to are still searching? We're searchers, right? There's that searching thing, but the concept of this power, which is so important for us to have something greater than ourselves, that we're going to get through this life. How do you speak to those people? Because that seems like a major, which is many people. What can you suggest to them? And then we'll take some questions for the audience. Taj and Gayan, if you want to go back and forth, whatever. Yes.
I sometimes take it upon myself to lead a whole retreat about God without using the word God. That we need language to convey things, and oftentimes that language is a barrier. So when you said, how do we relate to a higher power? Yes, there's a question of a higher power, and we can contemplate certain things. We can contemplate the immensity of the sky and the stars we see at night. We can contemplate the reality that we did not create ourselves. We have no idea how we got here. And we can contemplate that our life could cease right now if there was not some kind of sustaining spirit. But the other thing is, and I think this is the deeper issue for many, is that existence has a heart. And for having gone through so much disappointment and pain in life, which is inevitable, How does the heart relate to life and existence as being loving? And I think that is something that the intellect cannot fully take us to that understanding. And that's part of the inner process to the discovery of the loving heart of existence, regardless of the name you give it.
Taj, you look like you're ready.
You're muted, Taj.
I think it's a necessary question and a good question, because we could become meditators and not have to have anything to do with God. We could be mindful meditators and be here now and not have to fool around with this problematic notion. I think it was Ken Wilber who said, God has a PR problem. And so we have to deal with that because it's part of our Western mind and Western psyche, so it needs to be clarified. And we do spend a good amount of time in New Rain and in retreats handling that, coming to terms with it, understanding what's at heart and how to find the truth inside that word that doesn't mean much anymore, or means so many different things. So
and it matters.
Yeah, it matters. And so, for the Sufi, like other paths, we can substitute love. I mean, if nobody thought about God or used the word God, and we went around each day being loving and being considerate and being compassionate and being aware of each other's presence, then we would be so far along that we don't have to have that concept. That concept is not useful in terms of how we behave in a loving manner. Another way the Sufis think about God is as the beloved, as that, and that doesn't mean some goddess figure in the sky, but that which our heart finds supremely beautiful. Hazar Inayat Khan says in one of his 10 Sufi talks, he says, there is one object of worship, the beauty that uplifts the heart through all levels, from the seen to the unseen. A child who never heard the word God grows up, and if we observe the world keenly, we look at a tree, we sit for a day and look at a tree and listen to a bird. We have a direct portal to that which we say God. Rilke had a wonderful term for God, the great homesickness I could never shake off.
Oh, lovely. Well, these are lovely discussion and great food, but I think we'll take some questions from our listeners. And by the way, please, everyone, do help support us so we can keep going with these free wisdom talks. The best way is to go to our Guru shop. The merchandise you buy helps us to keep going and support artisans around the world who make these eco merchandise and lifestyle garments. And also you can get the movie, which started it all here, Sunseed the Journey, at our website, sunseed.org/Guru shop. The first question then we have is from Amin. The question is the state of human consciousness now ready to take in the greater real depth of being in everyday life? Is it now okay to wake not just the restless, but the still sleeping?
Yes, we can awaken everyone with love.
Well, just to riff on that for a moment, awaking everyone with love implies the question of how do you go about awakening the still sleeping, and that has to be done purely. If there's rejection or impatience, it's tends not to be it. But if you can charm the sleeping which is what beauty does, then perhaps something can happen.
When I said awaken with love, I'm just making the assumption that it's true love, real love, which is not something that has demands and has judgments, but is a true caring for the welfare of another person, and is not a transactional business deal, and that our happiness does not depend on whether that person gives us something back or not. But I love the words of Mershid when he says, love itself is love's reward. So to love, to have a loving attitude, is the gift of love.
And
he also says, people surrender to power unwillingly, but to beauty willingly.
yeah. And part of that love is, one of the main features of love is a quality of attention and an understanding of the other. And it's like if you were raising a child and you're paying the attention to know what is developmentally appropriate, what is there a readiness for, so that you can hopefully stimulate their growth, but not more than they're ready for. So love has an exquisite attention, attuned, to use that word again.
Great, thank you, Yankee. You know, it seems like the question is not only is it okay, but I mean, maybe every time in history people have felt like this is like, there's so much going on now, it's critical, but it feels like we are in a special time when it's maybe even more important that we get people to awaken.
Well, you know, Pier Velayat used to talk about reconciling the irreconciliables. And one of the part of the art of being a human, a maturing human, is to feel the fire of that urgency and simultaneously abiding in the stillness and peace.
Yeah, one of the things that we're planning to do is come out with the sequel movie to Sunseed, which would be, looking at thought leaders of today who might be the seeds for tomorrow, exploring people like you, who, what did it mean to be a part of this seeding that happened in the 60s and 70s. And I don't know, before we take one more question, maybe you could, what would you both think would be important to put in a movie today if we wanted to try to help elevate humanity?
Taj?
We'll take the next question while you think. So do we have another question from the group? This is from Mary Solomon. Hi, Mary. Is there a link to go to the weekly attunements?
It's funny. It says weekly atonements. And that's funny because
Oh, I mean to say attunement. She caught herself. Autocorrect made the other word.
yeah, there is that link. I think it was put on the screen a couple of moments ago. newrain.info or something like that. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
And that brings up the website, and you'll see something about a link to the attunements.
And also all the other activities that you're doing, which the attunements are just one of them. So they can definitely plug in. Did you come up with an answer to help me, the poor little filmmaker, what I might focus on in addition?
Well, one thing I think is important is to show the creative endeavors that so many people are doing in so many fields, in water, in creating better soil. Our soil is depleted, where things are actually being done by these people that are dedicated themselves to creating something better. And it's so encouraging, and it goes so against the dire emergency, which it is, but like, okay, there's things happening, and that's a positive energy that's important, so that this hopelessness, it doesn't take root in us. So that's one thing. And again, is to have voices that are speaking the truth in all different segments of society, that we can actually feel through their consciousness, their dedication, their creativity, their camaraderie, their sharing, the taste of this new consciousness that's just emerging and needs, when an infant comes to earth, it's a soul, it's just soul. And the parents, the parenting figures, it's part of their service to the soul is to keep mirroring that little being, so it comes into being through the eyes and the smile of the parents, and it blossoms and blooms. So there's something important about nourishing and cultivating this new lovely heaven and earth and humanity, where we're brothers and sisters with all of creation.
Definitely what we maybe thought of as spiritual in the 60s and 70s has now been expanded. And so we need to deal with, all these aspects, especially the earth and all the humanity that we are on this earth. So I think we're ready for your attunement. Just one last question then for you. What do you both see as your direction and mission in the time that you have left here?
A short answer. I would just say briefly, Amartat, I mean, it's such a in some ways, kind of question that one would have on a resume, but in another sense, when you ask that question, it strikes deep. I would say my work here and the time I have left is to do what I can to support that transition from the ego-centered life and view into the transition of the new mind of people. And secondly, or simultaneously, to do what I can to provide comfort and support and understanding to people through life, because life is difficult for so many people. And we have this access, this inheritance of spiritual light and wisdom that can make sense of life and provide meaning regardless of circumstances. So That's what I feel I'm here for.
Thank you, yeah. Lovely.
One of the things right now that I'm kind of tuning into as an offering through meditation and through retreats and through different programs that I offer is to help create the, let's say, the awareness of the pathways and portals between the form world and the formless world, that they are not so far apart, and to help see how the formless world, the infinite world, pervades this world through every breath, every night's sleep. And so that this dichotomy is more or less, there's a greater understanding of a greater consciousness that holds both life and death, the hereafter and here. So I'm not sure why I'm drawn to this. But there's an inner guidance to keep tuning us so that we hear right here the infinite right among us. And so if nothing else, when we pass individually from this plane to the next, that portal is known, that portal is established, or if the earth goes through changes, that there's these portals. So that's something I'm drawn to.
The Sufis speak about dying before the physical death of the body. Is that sort of what you're talking about as portals?
Yeah, we can actually go through everything that a person goes through except the loss of the physical body, and basically the physical body is the soul's experience through the senses. So when the physical body is not here, the soul doesn't have that avenue of perception and experience. But to learn here now in the body, what is the soul's experience in addition to just through the senses of this physical world? And that's what the Sufis call the planes of consciousness. We enter that at night during sleep. We enter it in samadhi. We enter it, but to make it more known and that it's available. We just have to do that one little thing. Die. Die to our attachments. Die to our identity.
Well, Pier Velayat went like this, but he also taught us how to go like this, right? The angels thank you. So Taj Inayat Gayan, and everybody out in the audience, maybe you can do this even though we can't see you, if you appreciated this great time together. And now, Taj.
But I want to appreciate you, Amartat, and thank you for the time and energy and love that you're bringing to this endeavor. And it's reaching a lot of people, and God bless you and the work you do. And Yafatah.
I wanted to say something along those lines too, Amartat, when you asked about if there was another Sunseed movie, and I was reflecting on the title that you've given this endeavor, that you've dedicated all these decades to, Sunseed, and the nurturing of this seed in the form it was taking all these decades ago, but also the seed that's emerging now and that you're still continuing to serve. So
thank you. I guess we do what we feel we're drawn to doing and have to do, and I just feel like this is my life, and I'm very appreciative of what you said and everything that's been given. And we're going to title the new movie, it looks like, is called Sunflower.
Well, Amartat, somehow what you've chosen to do is beautiful.
And we'll need all of your help, because we're going to do crowdfunding very soon to get the movie going, you'll stay tuned. And now stay tuned for Taj Inayat, who's going to lead us in a wonderful attunement. Thank you, Taj.
So I know we've been sitting for a while, friends. Perhaps before we attune, we could just attune to our body for a moment and move in our chair, or stand up and stretch. Notice your shoulders. I try and in my classes not have us sit for more than 45 minutes, and here we've gone quite a long time. So I'm going against my own rules. But, make sure your jaw is loose. And okay. So, Marcus, is there something else you could put on the screen for a moment? Maybe the sunseed view, or other than my picture for myself? All right, friends. So let's, for a moment, just breathe, being aware of a somewhat downward motion, direction, down from the head. Just try out, just sitting in your heart, as if that's bringing your head down into your heart. And even then further, be aware of your belly. Sitting on your chair or on the cushion, the pillow. The earth beneath you, whether your feet, your legs, your butt. See if there's a feeling, or you can cultivate something like, I'm here. With your eyes open at first, you might take a moment to look around. And look out the window, and as we become present, as we become here, you start to maybe sense, oh, I'm not just in an environment of content, of windows, walls, tree, computer. There's consciousness here. My eyes see, and something in my eye sees. Again. Rumi says, no need to go outside. Be melting snow. So let's see what's really here right in this moment. Yes, we have impressions, dreams, memories, stories. They somehow mysteriously float around. But if the truth be known in this moment, we actually don't have a future. It's not here yet. Many possibilities. And before we really take the next step, let's just take a moment and acknowledge or imagine or whatever word we want to use to tell ourselves all our loved ones, all those who live in our heart, our families, our lovers, our pets, our world, all our connections. We don't sever them. We don't leave anyone as we awaken, as we become present to this moment. So let us see what's here right now. Notice breathing. Really find the sensation, the direct sensation of breathing. So in the spiritual lexicon, we could call this concentration. It means we're paying attention to something. We choose something to pay attention to, and then all the other things that come and go, our thoughts and our feelings, we just let that happen because that happens. There's no need to try and do anything about that. We're choosing to pay attention right now to something that's right here, directly experienceable. It's breathing. How many years have you lived in this body? How many experiences and dramas and have you had in this life since that first breath? The whole story unfolded. The story of you. And here all along has been and is here now, this breathing. Never for a moment, unless we've had a medical crisis, but for the most part. Our first breath, our fleshy body was quickened into a separate life from our mother's womb. Inhale, exhale, gap. In comes a new breath. Even if we tried holding it forever, we couldn't. It lets itself out. Returns to that empty mystery. And then what? Oh, my goodness. A new breath has arrived. It's here, it's given. I live. I have this day, I have this life. I am given this breath. So this is seeing what's here, paying attention, looking carefully. We see, oh, I am being made alive. I am being given life, not just at my first breath, breath by breath. Given by the one, the giver of breath. Very personal. What is more personal than the breath we take in ourselves? And what is more mysterious and universal that we have no idea what it is? It's just given, a gift. And now let's look at one more. Looking closely at one more aspect of our direct experience. What is it? It is that I know this breath, that I am aware. So there's breath, and then there's awareness, knowing. In Sufism, this is called the soul. The witness, the soul, the knower. The student once asked the teacher, is there anything more wondrous than the wonders of nature? And the teacher said, Yes, to be aware of the wonder. In this moment, know this knower. Who is hearing? Who is awake? Buddha was asked his name, and he said, the awake one. So we'll sit together for a few moments. Just here, awake. We could say this awake one, this awakeness, has always been here. No beginning. We were born. There was awareness. But no knowing of our awareness. Not knowing we are aware. This is the journey of awakening. Now for just a moment, with this awakened, witnessing, aware that we are aware, that there's hearing, there's a hearer, a knower, a taster. See if we can just practice for one more minute. Now that we have the awake part of ourselves on board, see if we can just keep this posture of the witnessing, knowing soul, but not abstract, not out there, not remote, but right, our heart is awake, completely here. There's no elsewhere, there's no elsewhere. This awakeness. And then just let things happen, let things be. A thought comes, a thought about a thought, a feeling. Just like double vision is like an ocean viewing its own waves. Our thoughts, our feelings, the sounds, our body sensations, the movement of ocean consciousness. Okay, friends. We'll bring this attunement to closure. Although breathing goes on until, if you've ever sat with a dying person, you notice that there's greater and greater gaps between the exhale and the inhale. You think maybe that's it, and then no, another inhale comes, and then at a certain point, there is no more inhale, and the soul has departed from this body of senses. But we can know that soul's journey even in the sensing body. So maybe just throughout the day or the week, you might remember to pay attention to breathing and notice that there's a noticer and a knowing. And we'll close with a Sufi prayer brought by Taj Inayat Gayan called Khatum. It starts with O Thou. So already it means we're speaking intimately with the beautiful one. With what moves our heart. O Thou, who art the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the Lord of heaven and earth, open our hearts that we may hear thy voice, which constantly comes from within. Disclose to us thy divine light, which is hidden in our hearts, that we may know and understand life better. Most merciful, gracious Lord, give us thy great goodness. Teach us thy loving forgiveness. Raise us above the distinctions and differences which divide us, and send us the peace of thy divine Spirit, and unite us all in thy perfect being.
Thank you, Taj. Thank you, Taj. We have an echo, I think. I guess everything we do becomes magnified and duplicated many times. Thank you, Gayan. And to our audience, thank you for being with us today. You can share this wonderful wisdom talk and all of our others by inviting your friends, your loved ones to take a look at sunseed.org/wisdom talks. And while you're there, be sure to look at the movie that started this all, Sunseed the Journey, and join our Guru Shop and Bazaar for sustainable merchandise that helps us support all of these talks. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's give Taj and Gayan another Pier Velayat, I call it Pier Velayat angel thank you. To everyone, good afternoon, wherever you are, good night, good morning. May you all be blessed. Namaste. Shalom Aleichem. Assalamu alaikum. Jai Ram. Om. May the long time sun seed shine upon you.